Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin at the top of the hour and will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtags GLR Week and or GL Reading and or Learning Tuesdays to tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet it. We encourage you to share your questions and reflections and observations on social media. So once again, connect with the campaign on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will start shortly and it will be recorded.
Man.
Get dressed. Make your bed.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar, part of GLR Week 2020, which began Monday and culminates today. I'm Yoli Flores. I'm Chief Learning Officer for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you all for joining us for this exciting learning conversation with education leaders from California and South Carolina. I'll get us started with just a few housekeeping details. So first, we'd love you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, your city and state, and your organization. And please be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here with us. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We'll spend the last 20 minutes or so responding to the questions being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed next week to all who registered. It'll also have a link to the bios and all of the information from this webinar. You'll see the link appear in the chat box so that you can follow up. And finally, we will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation. During the Q&A, you'll see it pop up on your screen, and we highly encourage you to respond. This really helps us with our continuous improvement and our commitment to quality. So before we begin, let me just share a little bit about GLR Week 2020. GLR Week is the campaign's biannual convening, which brings together the states and the communities in the GLR network, our philanthropic partners, and our program partners. What's unique about GLR 2020, besides that we went virtual this year, is that this year GLR Week 2020 was transformed into a series of events and activities featuring the work and the priorities and the progress of 24 states and communities in the GLR network, all focused on ensuring early school success, mobilizing efforts to slow, stop, and reverse learning loss, and embracing parents as essential partners. This interactive map that you see on the screen shows the events and activities across the country all week long. We'll also provide a link to the map in the chat box so you can see all of these events and perhaps go back and listen to any of the webinars that might be of interest to you, or follow up with any of the communities whose work might have inspired you. On the next slide, you'll see the 5 online events that we sponsored by the campaign. We're down to Friday today. And so although this webinar culminates GLR Week and our series of state and community events, as I said, you'll be able to download the recordings of any of the webinars or follow up with states and communities whose work may interest you. And again, you'll find these links in the chat box so that you can follow up. And finally, I want to call attention to the upcoming GLR Learning Tuesday webinars through the rest of the month. As you probably already all know, if you've been following our GLR Learning Tuesdays, they're always on Tuesdays and always at 3 Eastern. So on Tuesday the 21st, we have a webinar on meeting families where they are, leveraging spaces to advance early learning and literacy. And then at the end of the month, on July 28th, Relationships Matter, partnering with families to support early relational health. This is with Dr. David Willis, one of the nation's foremost experts on early relational health. So please join us for any of these July Learning Tuesday opportunities. And finally, if you are a funder, we invite you to our funder to funder conversations through the end of July, also on Tuesdays, but at 12:30 Eastern. If you're joining us today, you'll receive more details on each of these learning events, and we hope you will join us. All right, now, with all those details out of the way, let's get started. The impact of months of COVID-related school closures on student learning is clear. The effects are catastrophic, most especially for children from low-income families. According to Education Week, quote, many students will come in with significant deficits from the 2019 to 2020 school year, and every district must devise ways to diagnose and respond, end quote. So as states and districts work to determine how to safely return students to the classroom or determine how to continue virtual learning at home, teachers will need tools to diagnose where students are in their learning and where they will need support and tailored instruction. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading and our networks are committed to encouraging and supporting learning loss recovery strategies that will slow, stop, and reverse learning loss. The success of these strategies will depend on whether and how the learning loss recovery plan responds to each child's specific situation. And no one will know any of this without access to and use of workable diagnostic tools. We are committed to learning what we can about how to support the diagnose and response approach as imperative to the success of learning loss recovery. That is why we're delighted to host this learning opportunity and learn about the plans for the Rally platform in California and in South Carolina. Helping us moderate this discussion is the campaign's trusted friend, colleague, and implementation partner, Hetty Chang. Hetty is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit initiative Attendance Works. Attendance Works is the nation's go-to resource for strategies to reduce chronic absence. Since its founding in 2010, Attendance Works successfully moved chronic absence from a little-known term to a required reporting and optional school accountability metric in the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. A dynamic speaker, Hetty is also the author of numerous articles and reports on the impact of chronic absence on student success and educational inequities and what works to improve attendance. So Hetty, welcome, and thank you for serving as our moderator for this session. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Yoli. It is certainly my pleasure and privilege to be able to moderate this panel, which I think represents what is so remarkable about the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which is the opportunities that the campaign creates for all of us to learn from each other and to learn about the innovative practices that are developing in different parts of the country so that we can take that learning and see how we can accelerate progress in all of the places that we work. And the need to be able to do that has never been more important than now when we are challenged with COVID-19. We have so much to learn, and the diagnostic tools are an essential piece of this. And as we learn about what we can do, it allows us to have that opportunity to not only respond to the crisis at the moment, but to in fact build back better. So what I would now like to do is introduce the amazing panel that we have to join with us today. I'm going to introduce all three, and then we're going to have a chance to hear from each one of them, and then we'll have a chance to ask questions across our panel. So we are joined first by Noah Bookman. Hey, Noah, glad to have you here. Noah is the executive director of the CORE's Data Collaborative. He will tell you more about what CORE is. It's essentially a collaboration of starting when I started with it, was around 8 school districts across California. And what I will say is so amazing, and I think it might be 10 years ago, Noah, that we were in a room together. I have never seen anyone who is so knowledgeable about data analytics and metrics and has deep facilitation skills. You know, creating consensus across school districts, particularly about the metrics they can use and are willing to adopt in a universal fashion, is not at all easy. But Noah was able to approach this in a rational, thoughtful way that allowed everyone to buy in to what they were doing and how they could move that as a group. That skill is extraordinary. And it is why it's so important that the tool we're going to be talking today is being developed in partnership with CORE, which I think then can have both statewide and national implications. So no, I'm so pleased that you can be here. We will also be joined by Stephanie DeStasio. Stephanie is the director of the Office of Personalized Learning for the South Carolina Department of Education, and brings to us the experience of working at the elementary, middle, and high school level as an administrator, as a teacher, and now at the state level. You know, whenever you develop new tools, it is always important for it to be grounded in the insights of someone who really knows what happens in a classroom. Because if we can't take this and make it real in that environment, it almost doesn't matter what else we do. And last but certainly not least, and he's actually going to start us off, I have Jeff Dominance, who is the principal researcher for education analytics. And what happens when you look at someone's bio is you realize all the things that they bring to this work. He's a professor, a researcher, a project leader, and I think incredibly important, the co-founder of a startup. I feel like we're in startup all the time now. You know, even when we didn't think we started up a new organization, we suddenly find ourselves in startup. And I think what's so key to Rally, the tool that Jeff will be talking about, is he's bringing the insights and the knowledge he has from all of those experiences into this work. And with that, I'm going to start with Jeff. I'd like Jeff to start off with telling us about the Rally platform and what is it designed to do?
Hey, thanks, Hetty. And first of all, thanks for having me here. And this is, I appreciate it because it's a good opportunity to look back. It's been a crazy 4 to 5 months for all of us, but at Education Analytics organization, trying to think about, you know, when we got into this and started working with CORE and started working with South Carolina. And we really, at the time, were focused on what people were talking about is the COVID slide. And we wanted to see, you know, what can we do to help slow the slide, and then how to help with recovery efforts, and what can we bring to that. And we thought, you know, a lot of the keys were the same things people were talking about in public health. And one key was assessment. And so we'll talk about, I'll show how we're bringing that in. And that's a place that we have some expertise. But the real focus was thinking, you know, the world's going to be completely different for teachers when they do get back to school. And we wanted to find some way to help to collect all the information in one place and give it some context at the student level to help understand where their students are, because you can't start thinking about how to recover, how to address the loss until you figure out what's missing, where are they now. And it'll be key to, because students will be in a different place in the fall than they've ever been. For a 7th grade teacher, the 7th graders aren't going to look like they did in past years. At 2nd grade, the 2nd graders aren't going to look like they did the past years. What can we bring in terms of assessment? And that's both academic assessment and well-being. And CORE has been leading in thinking about assessing using survey measures to assess well-being. So like it says here on the slide, we want to bring different sources of information into focus, be historical data, survey measures, academic, formative assessments, and then use with some of our expertise in predictive analytics, I'll talk a little bit about in a couple minutes, to help them say not only where are you now, but where do we think you will be, and where would you have been in the absence of the COVID disruption. One thing that CORE has been focused on has helped, and I think is a very unique aspect of this, and I think will affect a lot of things going forward, is introducing equity pauses for the teacher, because it's really a tool for, we're focusing on teachers and their students right now. So these various features are these equity pauses. I'll show you something, and Noah will talk a little bit about. Some note taking. We got great feedback, especially from some educators in South Carolina early on, thinking about how we can make this more useful for them, about taking notes, passing notes, and then thinking about how that actually works within the educational framework, within the legal framework of student information, and then student grouping procedures as you think about differentiated learning and how that's going to be different this year than it might have been in the past. Figuring out, grouping is again bringing context to the data. And then links to resources, another place where South Carolina, we're working with them. So if you look at the next slide, it shows you kind of what the interface looks like. And I find it's hard to just talk about the various features with it. People finally say, well, what does it actually do? What does it look like? And so the one on the left is like the home screen for the teacher, in this case, Ms. or Mr. Lopez, and they can go to see how the classrooms are doing. They can choose from different classrooms, or they can see how a student is doing. And at the bottom, you see different aspects of the toolbox. I'm just going to show you a couple of slides, but you can see there's rostering, there's managing groups, there's this note-taking features, there's information and resources. We'll link to things mostly provided by the state, or we're working with CORE to kind of curate some resources. And then alternatively, you can go straight to the student. So that's what if you clicked on that student, then it would have gone, oh, sorry. These are just screenshots we're going through right now. It would have gone to this page on the right, which is this student. And you can see things here, different kinds of places we're getting different information. We have a diagnostic survey for the start of the year, which will have a bunch of questions about well-being and learning environment, and then some open-ended questions so the teacher can learn something about the students more personal. And then we'll put the quotes in there, like, I'm not afraid to ask my teachers questions. They help me most by listening to me. Something that gives some more some important information to the teacher about this student who they haven't seen before. And then you see lower in the screen, there's some kind of summary of responses from a well-being survey, or then there's sub-scored where they performed on different areas on MAP tests in ELA and math. And we've worked with some of the STAR iReady map to bring in the data. So again, we're focusing on bringing the data. They've been very helpful in saying, okay, let's figure out how we can get this all in one place, because while speaking as a parent, I know that what teachers deal with in finding information in different places. And then you'll see a little pause button there. I'll talk about it next one, but let's go to the next slide. This would be if you went to, on the left, if you've gone to the student's well-being page, and you see it's displaying different specifics about responses to the survey. And I should say this is just a mock-up, and this isn't how the survey looks now, but they actually won't let me into the dev site because they think of the harm I can do. That's not really my expertise. So I was able to make screenshots from mock-ups that are a little bit, just a few weeks out of date. But so this how we display measures, and they can click through, and so there's a lot of interactivity for the teacher. And then on the right, this is a way of displaying so performance in different sub-scores on maybe a MAP assessment. And then also we're tracking overall scores in this assessment snapshot, so you can see how a student has done in the past. So imagine yourself, you're a teacher in the fall, and so what you're seeing is here how they did back in fall, starting in fall 2018, and then going forward, and there are interim scores, there are state assessment scores, and then there are predictions to the right of the COVID, the vertical dashed line. And so one thing we're predicting there is where they would have been if COVID had not occurred, and then where they would be in the future. And so these are the kinds of things we're trying to do. But then you might see a pause button, I think, on the left, on the well-being. So if you hit that pause button, you get to the next screen. if we turn the slide. And there's an equity pause in this, and I'll let Noah talk more about this, but places for a teacher to reflect on the student, not just, we don't want them to be stuck in the numbers. And a lot of people look at my organization and are like, you guys are all about the numbers, and we recognize numbers only tell part of the story. Our big thing that we want to do is bring some context, help develop the full story about the whole child. And so that's what I'll say for that. And I'll just wrap up on the next slide by talking about more my area, my comfort zone. Hetty talked about my various things. Certainly the thing I always feel more comfortable in is talking about, hey, data, let's figure out what we can do with data and to help make better decisions. And the decisions here on how do you educate the students. So a key thing that we stress is this is not for accountability, it's for informing practice. And I understand the hesitance of people like if you want to use interim tests for accountability, if you're pushing assessment and they think it's for accountability and these are special time, these are just unprecedented times, we don't want to do it. That's not, we're just trying to get information together to help educators. And so what we've done is we've try to figure out how we can apply our expertise in in growth models for accountability purposes in states around the country to say, well, given the information we have about you from, like in California, their smarter balance scores, and then some interim scores, be they MAP or iReady, STAR, reading inventory, or iReady IABs, the interim assessment blocks. Where do we think you would have been in the spring if not for the disruption? And then where do you think you would be now and then into the future? And then once we get to the fall, when we start getting assessment data, and Stephanie will talk about the really innovative stuff they're doing in South Carolina to this end about assessments early on and recovery efforts early on, we're going to then say, okay, now we know something about where you are now. What does this tell us about where you will be in the future? And then it'll let you track how well that recovery. So we're really excited about it. Still a ton of work ahead. But we're really excited and we're appreciative of everyone who's been contributing, both within education analytics at CORE in South Carolina, and then assessment vendors and survey organizations, just everyone really pulling together to try to get this going.
So thank you so much, Jeff. And we'll have chance to come back to you, but now you all can see this remarkable tool that is getting created that can pull information from so many different places and allow us to have some analytics and modeling that really informs teachers and is aimed at informing teachers and helping them collaborate on how to respond to the needs of kids this coming fall. So with that, I'd like to ask Noah to come on, and let's go to the next slide. So Noah, just before you go into talking about how you're using Rally, could you first give people a context for what is CORE?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Noah Bookman, and Hetty, thanks so much for the amazing introduction. I joked earlier that I'm going to take you with me. Just deeply appreciate that and humbled to be with everybody today. So CORE Districts, we're a nonprofit. We're based in California. We started as and continue to be an organization run by and for districts. Our main members and the people who make up our board are from the 8 districts you see here, large urban districts in California. And our board, our nonprofit board, we're a nonprofit, are the superintendents of these districts. Next slide. A few years back, we're sort of ending our work. We had a No Child Left Behind waiver amongst these 8 districts, which was where Hetty and I initially engaged. And we were acting kind of like a state within the state of California doing this No Child Left Behind work. And then No Child Left Behind was ending. And throughout the state, we were getting a lot of interest in our core data system and our work. And, you know, I give a lot of credit to our districts and superintendents who said, you know, when we think about school quality, we want to think about the whole child and the whole school. And so we had developed our School Quality Improvement Index, which had a number of indicators in it, academic indicators, social emotional indicators, school climate indicators. And there were other districts in California that said, hey, I want to be a part of that. Fast forward 5-6 years, and we now have over a third of kids in California in our data system. California has about 6 million kids, 2.4 million last year in our data system, over 180 school systems, a little less than half of the counties in the state support their districts in participating. And so that is our core data collaborative. And we do operate as a true collaborative. And a lot of what brought us to Rally was, into this concept was right in the early moments of the school closures and the pandemic, we just had listening sessions, and we had the leaders from districts and county offices and charter management organizations coming together, and we just kind of opened things up and said, what's going on? What are you doing right now? What do you anticipate to be some of your future needs? And one of the things that we heard over and over again was, we don't know what the back to school period is going to look like, but we could sure use some help in that period, understanding where kids are academically and understanding where kids are social emotionally. So we were very pleased to partner with our colleagues at EA in South Carolina to move this forward. Next slide. So Core Districts is focused on equity-driven continuous improvement. Data and analytics is a part of that. We also do some work around training and what we call capability building to help people understand and utilize the tools and approaches of what some people call improvement science or quality improvement. And then we have some deeper dive work that we do with schools and districts around. We have a 9th grade on track community. We have a deep dive in Sacramento City to support continuous improvement there. Our data and accountability work, our data and analytics work is really part of what we see as our moral imperative to support both the youth in California and across the country. Next slide. So I'll actually, why don't we go past this piece? It's the next slide. We are making Rally available to our Core Data Collaborative as part of, we're not able to do what we usually do. And so we wanted to make something available to our data collaborative that would, take the place of what we usually do and give them something of use in this unprecedented moment. I'm going to highlight a couple of things that Jeff already talked about, but I'm going to highlight it from the perspective of like, what's the importance of this from the California perspective. And so the first thing that Jeff brought up, and then I highlight some of these images here, is the notion of seeing the well-being data and the academic data in one place. So seeing the whole child is very important to us and to our districts. And so that's one of the things that we emphasized in working on this. And as Jeff mentioned, part of our charge at Core has been to curate, that's a kind of a fancy word for like collect, the set of items and make selections of the set of items done, and it will be open source. So anybody who wants to use the surveys is welcome to use it. We'll be releasing that later next week. And then we're going to have a set of pulse instruments that districts can give during the year too. And from an administration perspective, we make the items open source and our districts administer them in any number of ways. We have a really nice partnership with a group called Panorama. So some of our districts work with Panorama to do survey administration. We're also looking to support some of our districts in using Google Forms. Others, we're almost have something in place with Qualtrics. They've been great to work with. And then Kelvin is another group that we're working closely with to figure out how we can help those who use Kelvin, to administer the survey items. So, but to really give the picture of the whole child, along with the academic data, where, as Jeff mentioned, we've got wonderful partnerships now with the folks at iReady, the folks at MAP, the folks at who do the Renaissance Star, and then in California, the SBAC IABs are a big piece of what folks use. So those are the interim assessment blocks that the state actually pays for access to for our teachers, so they can use those free formative assessment tools, which we're also bringing into the tool. Next slide. So this is building off of what I was mentioning before. What's interesting about this moment, and we're being really thoughtful about how we do the survey items to this point, is that usually when we use surveys, we've used them more at the school and district level to see trends and differences between groups of students or schools. In this moment, there's a real deep need to understand and get information about specific children. And so part of what we're doing inside the Rally platform is actually student level information. And so with that in mind, we're being really thoughtful about what items to include, and also the training and support for educators to think about how to use that information in a thoughtful way with their students. Really encouraging, and we've had educators help us with this. We've had equity advisors try to encourage a growth mindset amongst our educators as they look at what children are saying. And the best result of this would be that it helps teachers open a door to build stronger relationships with their students. All right, next slide. The last thing I'll mention, and Jeff brought this up before, But we at CORE focus on equity-driven continuous improvement, and equity is one of those words that people throw around, and I do it too, and it's hard to sometimes put your finger on it. But there's some specific things that we try to encourage at CORE to try to bring an equity mindset. And one of those things is the idea of slowing down. Our brains are designed to have a quick reaction to things. That happens with everything we do, and that's important, and it was important evolutionary-wise because you wanted to be safe in the jungle or wherever it is that you were operating. You want to be able to have quick reactions, and so there's a reason why, from an evolutionary perspective, we have these like blink reactions to things. But when it comes to looking at data, those blink reactions are where our unconscious bias comes up. And so what an equity pause does is it's a way to pause and reflect. And simply by slowing down, we transition from what some people might be familiar with, the idea of our system 1 thinking versus our system 2 thinking. So when we pause and reflect, we move from that immediate reaction system 1 thinking into that more reflective, thoughtful system 2 thinking, where we can bring our biases to the surface and then take a more honest and unbiased look at the data as a way to then take next steps and do that in a more thoughtful way. And so throughout the tool and in the training that we're doing with our educators, we're embedding this concept of equity pauses as a way to kind of operationalize equity and help folks really slow down, pause, reflect, and be thoughtful as they look at their youth and think about what they're going to do next to help the students in their classrooms. And with that, I'll close out my introduction.
Thank you so much, Noah. This gave us such a concrete picture of what it means to take a tool like this and put it into the hands of practitioners. So we're going to continue on that theme. And I'm going to ask Stephanie, so can we go to the next slide, from South Carolina. So Stephanie, you're taking this truly at a state level. So tell us a little bit about South Carolina, its approach to personalized learning, and then why and how why this tool is important to you and how you're seeing it get used in South Carolina.
Sure, absolutely. A number of things, just so everyone knows, if you've downloaded the slide deck or when you click that link, a number of these things do have hyperlinks, so you'll have access to all of those. In South Carolina, we see personalized learning as an educational framework that supports all students as they're seeking to achieve what we talk about as the knowledge, the skills, and the characteristics, which are identified in our profile of a South Carolina graduate. And so what we believe is that by fostering student ownership of the learning, which is a key component of our framework for personalized learning, developing learner profiles, a very critical element, learning pathways, and adopting flexible learning environments, that each student's educational experience is then tailored to meet their unique strengths, needs, and goals. And so in order to support that framework for personalized learning that we have in South Carolina, our State Department of Education, our State Superintendent, Molly Spearman, recognized that we needed all teachers in the state to have an easy-to-use tool that would take what often requires teachers doing across multiple different spreadsheets and lots of different things that they're pulling together, possibly over the course of hours, days, and weeks. That work of gathering data, resources, planning, and putting all of that together and making that into a consumable format for our teachers in South Carolina. And our view as a State Department of Education is that with the right tool, our teachers can really begin to act as diagnosticians and focus their planning time, their valuable planning time, on designing the right supports for small groups and individual students so that the learning is truly personalized. And so as you'll see on our next slide, as part of Governor McMaster's Accelerate SC initiative in our response to COVID-19, the Accelerate Ed task force was convened, and that task force included a wide range of folks. And they provided both guidance and crafted some recommendations for our returning to school. Part of the recommendations from our task force, as you'll see here, was that all districts develop plans for 5 additional days that our legislature at the time was considering adding, and they have added. But specifically, we wanted to use this acronym of LEAP. Learn by revisiting prior content and skills, evaluate diagnostic activities, reviews of IEPs, 504s, all the types of plans that we really need to dive into with our students as we return. Analyze for, again, that data analysis piece, and then prepare the social emotional preparation, professional learning that our educators need, establishing of new routines and procedures as we return. So those 5 additional days, those LEAP days as we call them, we knew that those were going to be really critical activities to be taking place during those days. And those days, those LEAP days, are in addition to what you see on the screen, ARC, Academic Recovery Camps, which are happening currently this summer. And our academic recovery camps are really an expansion of previous camps, which were focused on our 3rd grade students who needed additional supports in order to reach their grade level targets. This year, our academic recovery camps have been expanded, and they include our it's pre-K through 3rd grade students. And we're using pre-assessments and post-assessments to make sure that we know where our students are as they're getting ready to come back into our buildings as well, or to our hybrid or virtual learning spaces. And so additionally, in South Carolina, we had a requirement for our districts to administer both pre-assessments to all students within the first 10 days of school and post-assessments by December 2020, so that we can begin to examine the impact of the interventions that are occurring, and then just informing our plans and adjusting our plans as we continue through the year. So our dedication to education site talks about and expands upon the recommendations that we have for returning to school. But ultimately, the South Carolina Department of Education really recognized that this is an opportunity for us to empower our teachers, bringing together data and resources all in one place for them. And in South Carolina, those are things which have typically existed in silos. Those have not always been in one place. And for us, the Rally tool it's a tool that has an intuitive layout. You saw some of the screenshots. And our overall goal is really just to ensure that in every single district in our state, that there is the support via a powerful tool to inform those learner profiles that we know are so important in the hands of our teachers, to be able to allow our teachers to put the focus on building pathways forward with all of their students and their families. And I think it's important to note that in South Carolina, yes, our state is leading the way on helping to create this Rally tool, but we have made a very strong commitment that this data belongs to our districts. So we want to ensure that every teacher in every district has this tool, but really and truly, this is their tool, each district, each school, each teacher, so that they have what they need to really be empowered to advocate for their students.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I think at this point, we're going to bring all 3 panelists back, and we're going to delve into some of the questions. And I'm going to start with you, Stephanie, as we're moving to that. One of the questions, since you were speaking of teachers, is, so what has been the teacher response to this tool? How has this been vetted? And maybe start with you and then go to Noah to hear from what they've heard from the core districts.
Yeah, so a couple of things with that. You heard Jeff mention early that in the design of the tool, from the very beginning, we have been having constant feedback loops with teachers in the field, with district level leaders, with building levels, but with teachers. Because as you said yourself, Hetty, it does not matter if we design this tool and it does not work for a teacher, it will not get used, and then it doesn't matter. And so what we were really trying to solve for is exactly that. How do we make this a usable tool that empowers teachers? Because again, we know that time is precious and time is of the essence. And what we wanted to do was make sure that we were not designing something that didn't work for teachers. And so yes, their voices have been heard through multiple feedback loops all the way through. I will say that education analytics has been very responsive to suggestions, to changes, we've gone through, Jeff told you, even those screenshots were a couple weeks old, and I was like, oh, some of those things are really different, because again, it's being built in real time and getting that feedback in real time from our teachers, and not just teachers in South Carolina, all of the teachers in the California districts as well.
So let me actually ask another question, because it looks like Noah's adding his, nodding on that one. So when data goes into this, that's another question, and this may also be for Jeff. Are teachers having to put in that data? I mean, there's a huge worry that we're now adding to the burden of teachers. Or is it coming, what's the way that this tool gets populated?
So that's a great question. So we actually, teachers would want to put in some of their own. That's not going in right away, because some of the formative assessments they get on and information like to be able to integrate. But right now, the data that's coming in is we get data, statewide data from the state, and then we're getting, and then anything from the interim assessments, the MAP or the STAR test or the iReady. But, so we get demographic data on the students, we get school records, we get attendance information. That's all. It's all being automated. And the idea for us is, we're also, this is a little in the weeds, but there's a lot of like file loading in the past. We're trying to do everything we can just to automate everything. So for like two of the vendors, for all of them, we want to just have test scores. When a teacher does, when they administer a test, we're just going to get it updated overnight from the assessment vendor. When surveys are done, to the extent possible, we're trying to get it so it's completely automated. Teachers shouldn't have to be inputting anything other than taking notes, grouping things. It's purely a tool for them, not to make we don't want to add to the noise. We don't want to add.
So we got this is automated. Here's another question. And is this something that can be looks different in South Carolina versus core, or Noah, within your core districts, can they vary this? Can it be tailored to particular realities? No, why don't you tell us how that's
working? So from an infrastructure perspective, the basic infrastructure is the same inside of California, whether you're one district or another. The thing that will be different is that some districts administer some assessments and some administer others, and so that will be different. But the tool is designed to sort of accommodate that. And so the reason why we were incorporating the assessments that we mentioned earlier on is those are the most common ones that are used in California. In the future, we want to get potentially more assessment data in there, but we start with the most common ones. The other choice that LEAs will have, districts and schools will have, is which survey instruments they choose to give and which they choose not to give, and so that'll determine some of the information that gets populated for them. So there's some choice there, but yeah, to Jeff's point, we're trying to make every effort possible to minimize burden, both, by the way, on schools and teachers, but also on the district IT teams. Recognize that every person is reinventing their role right now, and that includes the people who are trying to figure out, okay, how do I do online school for all of my students when I didn't do that in the past? And so those are the same people that we need to then integrate with, so that we know who the teachers are and what kids are attached to those teachers and all that stuff. So we're doing everything possible to make those processes as simple as possible.
And I would just say, Hetty, one of the things that I think is really important in South Carolina, again, being a statewide perspective here, some of our districts are very small, in our most rural districts. People, in an administrative fashion, to Noah's point, they wear many, many hats. And so having a tool like this, that no matter what district you're in South Carolina, and no matter what your resources are in terms of personnel, this type of a tool with the automation piece really does act in a very powerful way to get teachers what they need.
And Stephanie, I'm going to stick with you for a second, because another question is about the other essential partner in all of this, which is parents.
Yeah.
So you all have been talking about using this tool with teachers, but parents also both may need to see information, but they also have critical information about students that may not be captured by any of those data systems that you've just. So what's the vision, or where is this tool in terms of incorporating that partnership with parents?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our office, we focus on personalizing for students. And one of the things we recognize is our students are not just our academic students in our classroom, right? They are a part of a family unit, and they come to us with a wide background of experiences, and we really have to honor that. And so one of the things we're really seeing, and just initially upfront, an initial way to be able to use this is imagine the power of a teacher conferencing with a parent. And again, that tool I mentioned earlier, it's very intuitive. The layout is very user-friendly. It's very easy to kind of see it, read it, access it. And so just in the simple act of a parent-teacher-student conference, you know, maybe a student-led conference, hopefully, being able to have open and honest, transparent conversation that is simple to understand and lays out goals for kids, but also values not just that academic number or those outputs, but really is looking at much more of that whole child approach, and having that open conversation with the child, the parent, and the teacher to think about that learning pathway as we're building forward and thinking about the goals we want to set with kids. How are the parents part of that conversation? How are the students part of that conversation? And what are our next steps to get where we need to go? And that's not just an academic discussion.
Noah, is there anything you would add around the potential use of this with families, with parents, and incorporating their perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate everything Stephanie just said. And we were just talking earlier today about, our training protocols that we're putting together for this and for the rollout. And we were talking about, oh, wow, we have to design this and really get picture the idea that like you're training people on an online environment, not an in-person environment probably, or both. I was envisioning like the training protocol where you're like, okay, teacher, imagine you want to take one of your parents in a Zoom call through their own child's status, and thinking about what the protocol will be for that. I think that's a perspective, definitely a perspective way that this could be utilized. And, one of the things we try to think about at CORE from a continuous improvement perspective is like, okay, so how might you test that out small and then see where it works? And then how do you grow it bigger? And really have a more of a continuous learning perspective. We're all moving so fast,
Yeah.
To try to be supportive. And which is great. So, you kind of got to build for that scale, but I'm anticipating that we'll have smaller take up at first. We're going to learn a ton from that, so that as we get more and more districts and schools, educators utilizing this, the protocol suggestions, even the tool itself will be improved as we get deeper into the school year.
And I guess I have a question too about that training, because you also have behavioral health well-being data in this tool. And we also know that families may have experienced serious trauma. How, as you're thinking about the use of the tool, are you training teachers to both understand that impact and interpret the data, as well as if they're now using it to talk with families, they're going to have to take that into account? And I realize you're building as fast as you can, but this question is, because there's a lot of things happening in the community too, that again, might not be captured in this tool, but the dialogue with family might yield some pretty serious information. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. And taking that very seriously. And so for example, next week, we're going to start to do some orientation sessions with some early adopter district leaders. And one of the questions is, okay, so you're going to be giving the survey instrument, and kids might say things that require immediate attention. What is your protocol and plan? Because this is really, there's a lot on district shoulders, and I used to work in a district, and I have the utmost empathy for what they're experiencing right now. But it's going to be really important that for districts, if you're choosing to collect this information about students, that you have a protocol in place for reviewing that information on a regular basis, flagging the kids that need some immediate attention and having support in place for that. In addition to that, for the more general student, many students are going through very difficult circumstances, but the vast majority of our students are going through a more typical struggle. And I don't want to diminish that in the least. But that's part of the life of an educator is interacting with students who are at various levels of comfort and challenge. And so for that side of things, for not the extreme situations, but for just the normal struggle that we're all at this point, we're going to be embedding resources that can be used, as well as having a well-being guide with suggestions of what you can do with your whole class or with small groups of kids. Resources, by the way, everybody's providing resources. So, that's just the nature of the beast. Hopefully the idea that it's right next to the data point will be a helpful piece because it'll take the teacher right to something they could try next. But nothing, replaces the other kinds of training that teachers already have, the instincts they have, and the support of their school systems that often have guidance and support around these pieces as well.
Jeff, there is a question for you. This is open source, correct? And if folks want to get access to it, how do they get access?
To like the tool, the platform. So that's something that right now we're focusing on South Carolina and core, but we will definitely want to be, bringing it to other school districts. Noah mentioned the surveys are open source and that anyone can get it. I'm not sure Noah probably knows better than me actually how we'll make that available. But yeah, that's the idea.
I also have a couple questions about where this is being developed. My understanding is right now, most of the data in the tool is 4th grade and up, correct? And the moving to below that, because there is not as much assessment data, is a work in progress. So could you maybe speak to that, and maybe Stephanie talk about how that fits, because you'll still have as a whole state a combined, I mean, clearly your initiatives also focus on younger kids, but maybe Jeff say a bit about where that is in development, and then Stephanie talk about how that fits with your state strategy.
Right. So it partially the focus 4th and above reflects the fact that state summative tests tend to start in 3rd grade, predicting 4th grade. But we are getting the interim scores for tests for both from K through 3, and we will be bringing those in and developing ways and reporting them on that same assessment snapshot, and trying to link. And then this is again we have questions about how to best present the material. So that's all definitely coming in. There are a bunch of challenges, but it's nothing. I mean, it will be there from the start. It's a question of how much and this is the question at all levels, how much can we have right away? It's where it's going to go in the future. That's very exciting. We're doing as much as we can right now, but it's definitely, part of the prime objectives.
Right. Yeah, I would say that we do anticipate that the data will become much more robust over time. But again, as Jeff just mentioned, because we are pulling from, as part of our requirement in South Carolina, every child, kindergarten through 3rd grade, yes, once they hit 3rd grade and we have that state assessment, that summative assessment, that's an additional data point that we don't have for those kids before. We're looking at this as their incoming 4th graders as a result of that 3rd grade state assessment. But for our students leading up to that, from kindergarten through 2nd grade, we will have data for them in those benchmark and interim types of assessments. So there will be information there. Teachers in those early grades will be able to, again, use that profile, use that pathway, and build the right, thinking about what's the right next step for each of those students. And our ultimate hope is that what this allows us to do is really decrease the number of our students who are not reading on grade level by 3rd grade. If we can give teachers in their hands a tool that helps them by pulling together not only the data we have kindergarten through 2nd and 3rd grade, but also right next to it, as Noah mentioned, right there, you don't even have to leave it, some resources that are high quality resources that support the instructional framework, then we're giving teachers back time to be able to really focus on their students.
Can you also talk, are you going to be making this available to school behavioral staff, health staff, other folks who are part of the school environment, not just teachers?
So in South Carolina, I will tell you, we are in a slightly different place in the core district with where we are with the well-being part of this, as you can imagine, trying to scale it to an entire state with different districts in different places. What we are working on with them are those protocols. What does that look like? How you have to make sure that you do have those really good protocols in place for who accesses that information about students, and also not sitting on that information when it should be going to someone who definitely needs to intervene. And so making sure we have those protocols and trainings and pieces in place so that we don't miss any signs that we shouldn't miss.
And is there a plan to integrate this with IEPs? Or how does this work with IEPs in either Core or South Carolina?
I don't know that I have a good response on that one, Hetty, if I'm being honest. I think the information that's there, to the extent that it helps in an IEP context, that's wonderful. There isn't yet a plan, to my knowledge, to integrate the data into like an IEP platform or what have you. But if this data is helpful in the context of an IEP, and that's something I think worth exploring. To the point earlier about other users of the information, certainly teachers and school leaders are the primary initial audience with a heavy emphasis on teachers. But we certainly are also anticipating that various district level leaders and others will find use in the information. We focused early on in our partnership with EA on the teacher level user because that's the hardest thing to support. But we certainly are also working towards the idea of aggregations and comparisons across the district, being able to benchmark against other districts, things of that nature are in queue for next iterations.
So one way I would say, Hetty, that this would absolutely support students with IEPs, 504 plans, et cetera, would be the way that this allows teachers to collaborate very powerfully. So immediately, if you think of a co-teaching type of an experience, a resource teacher or a special education teacher and a classroom teacher really working together, both having access to that data, both then also, we talked about that note-taking feature, being able to note for current and future teachers, what are some strategies that are working for this student? These are things that I'm seeing that are absolutely helpful, and I'm beginning to see progress, and these are the strategies I've used. And so having just a way to capture what works for kids when you do begin to see some improvements happening across time, across years, but also across teachers in a school who are all working together on a team to really find and make sure that we are supporting students in a more holistic way. I can see it being a tool that would be helpful.
Thank you. That is really helpful to hear that practice and that approach. Noah, I want to again also offer this up to you because I know that CORE has always had a long history of thinking holistically about kids. But Lisa Guernsey with New Americas asks whether or not, as you look at analytics on students' progress, and maybe this is both for you and Jeff, is there a way to tie data on their performance with data on the broader context of what students are coping with in their communities and homes? Whether that's inequitable access to, digital technology, but it's also data on unemployment, trauma, health, COVID deaths. Right now, while we know all of that is it's important to pay attention to that, the privacy issues, it's also so important to acknowledge how these outside factors are affecting teaching and learning in the classroom. So is there a way, you've talked mostly about, some of it is the health and well-being data that you have in your systems, but some of this might also be external data. Are there ways to see the connection between those factors?
Yeah, I think my one initial thought on that is that to the extent that we have folks engaging in the survey work as well as the academic work, we'll be able to draw some direct relationships. It's interesting, we went at the idea, at the topics to cover in the student diagnostic survey with a fairly open mind. And what we heard from principals and teachers is a desire to understand, one thing we heard about was wanting to understand kids' learning conditions at home, both during the spring and then currently. And so we're going to be asking questions that get at things like, is there somebody at home who's helping you out? Are you responsible for taking care of other people in your home? And so we'll have some ability to draw connections there and to look at the relationships between what we're seeing academically and what kids' home environment are like. And then I think, what you're pointing to is there. So one of the things, and we've been partnering with Education Analytics for a number of years, is our process tends to go together from research into operationalizing research. And so I think you're starting to get some areas of potential research that are really important about, you know, asking these bigger questions. Do we see differences in the acceleration of learning in different localities? Is there any association between that and what we're seeing from a medical perspective or an environmental perspective? Those are bigger research questions that we'll be in a position to explore. And I think I know Education Analytics takes their role very seriously in the area of research as well. And I think the opportunity to engage in that in the future could be quite helpful to the country.
Yeah, just to follow up, that's, you know, it's a natural, the questions that are going to be coming once we see what the COVID loss was and how it varied both within and across districts. And, you know, the variation within is going to be something that with the surveys, for instance, about the learning environments and the social emotional is going to be unique data that I think people will want to study. There's no question. Then also about recovery, and then further, you know, with the variation in the learning environments going forward with distance learning, I think it's going to be, we're going to have to try to figure out what actually works and works for whom, and then figure out how districts can support the needs of the people who don't have what they need. And I think these are huge questions. I think, you know, it's something we can't even think about right now, but those questions we'll be able to answer as best we can with the data, or others who have the, you know, inclination would be able to.
So I would not have the position I have now if I don't ask the question, which is, how does attendance data fit in with this? I have to say, I have this vision as we try to build back better in this environment, that we would actually know when a kid missed school, what it was that that kid missed. This was the lesson that the kid was not there for, because I always think that it's so hard for us to assess quality of education when we don't know whether the problem was the kid was there, but still didn't come out with the skills we thought the lesson would equip them with, or the kid just missed out on the lesson, and the problem is they went to the next lesson without the scaffolded learning that they needed to have. And I keep imagining we could someday have the technology and a system that might allow us to connect better what is participation and showing up for something, and how does that connect to actually having learned something. So where do you all see attendance data? And I will say, as another part of this, I am happy to say it seems like states across the country are starting to recommit to taking daily attendance, which is another thing that is quite exciting to me, because it's something that stopped happening in the spring, but I see a recommitment to that across many states in the country. So thoughts about where attendance data fits with all of this? Okay.
Yeah, so I will just say South Carolina we have a group really looking at and studying exactly that, Hetty. How do we make sure that we are accounting for, just from that standpoint, how do we make sure that we're accounting for our kids, but really one step further, how are we accounting for the engagement and the learning that's also happening, and not just were they physically there? An important metric that we absolutely want to know, but also how are we accounting for the learning that's happening? And so we are deeply engaged in that conversation as a state right now. So we do not have all the answers yet, but it is a something that weighs heavily on our mind. But I will also tell you, I mean, just as a testament to that, the fact that my office even exists at the state agency, an office of personalized and competency-based ed, we are wholly focused on really thinking about how do we make sure that our kids are achieving that profile of a South Carolina graduate, and how are we thinking about those competencies for them to get there? And so you're absolutely right. At the heart of that is we have to have well-articulated pathways for our students that really align to the data for where they need to go. And so I think this is a step in the right direction for us. If we have the data about where kids are and what they know and what they don't yet have mastered or have proficiency in, then we're able to better design that pathway with them and with their families for what their next steps in learning look like. And coupled with that full attendance picture, then what we want to see through that K-12 pathway for students is that what we, as you well know, the attendance of being there, of being engaged, are what we want to really get at is how do we make sure that when we do have them there and we do have their attention, that learning is actually happening in that same moment as well.
And so attendance is an issue with working with CORE that we have been involved in, and it started with annual attendance data and looking how that relates to predicting future outcomes and graduation. But then we started working on daily attendance data in one district, and our focus there was actually on predicting chronic absenteeism early on, so people could identify, like an early warning system.
Mhm.
But now with distance learning, it's a whole, but we didn't have daily instruction information or weekly. We might have interim tests. We didn't have it there. We had annual, so you could only do everything annual. Now, as you think about bringing in interim data, and you also, if a district wanted to or a school wanted to, they could record, bring in information on what's going on instructionally within the school. And we, once we have attendance data within, you could use this platform to get all that information in one spot and actually see the impact of attendance on, specifically the student outcomes, fine-grained.
Yeah, it's one of these things too, where it's like, gosh, if I could wave a magic wand and press the pause button and figure out how to get the team, figuring out how you integrate with all these different ways that attendance type information is coming through, and then figure out how to analyze it, I would totally press that pause button. I think it's going to be, if we're being realistic, I think there's going to be a lot of discovery work to understand, well, what is the nature of attendance and engagement in the first 2-3 months of school? And then, okay, knowing, this gets back, Hetty, to your earlier question about teacher burden. If a solution requires teachers now to fill out a lot more information, then we've totally screwed up. If a solution is about how do we harvest the information in standardized, scalable ways from the common technology tools that teachers are using, then we're like, game on. We can do something with that. So it's not, I think we're learning that it's not as simple as we'd all like it to be. While there are sort of a handful of online learning tools that folks use, the data acquisition is not as easy as you might think it is. You might have kids, a lot of people are using Google Classroom, right? You might have kids logging in as their parents on accident. There's all kinds of things that are challenges in this space, but those are things to discover. And so again, if we can wave a magic wand and know the answers in the next week or two, I'd love it. I think in reality, we're going to spend the first semester understanding this new world. And then maybe in the second semester, we'll be able to make sense of what happened in the first semester and figure out a way to better understand things going forward. And I think the good news on this is, to your point, by the way, I loved, Hetty, the way you just described so rationally how we should think about attendance, even though it's like, oh, but it doesn't work that way. But it's like, of course, wouldn't it be nice to know what kids missed? And but I think, every school system in the nation now has some kind of learning management system, which we couldn't say, 6 months ago. That basically all teachers know how to use on some level, or most teachers. So now we have this wonderful opportunity to get more information passively collected through these systems and make sense of them. I don't know what sense to make of them yet, but I think I don't anticipate those things are going to all of a sudden go away once we're back to full-time in-person learning. I anticipate that they'll be continuing to be used. So now we have even more information to work with and to give ourselves a more clear picture. It's just not going to be like September 1, I think, when we can make clear sense of these things. I think it might be January 1 would be a very ambitious and exciting thing to shoot for.
Yeah, I think the idea to give ourselves time to learn, I keep thinking we're in a 2-year journey for a new reality of education. This year, I mean, it sounds like first you all are trying to make sure that Rally gets used by teachers as much as possible to inform the startup of school. And then, as you said, Noah, we'll learn some things from that. And I will even say about attendance, Dan, I mean, attendance taking and distance learning, I don't exactly know what's the best metrics for that and where they get stored and what should count. I think we're going to have to learn that, and the idea is that these kinds of technology. So I'm going to ask you, and I feel like, Yoli, I want to ask one last question and then turn it back to you maybe. When you think about, it's December 1st, 2020, what's your biggest hope for what you would have gotten out of using this tool? What would make you know that using this tool at this time was a success?
Well, I'll go first. I'll jump in. And I actually have two ways that I think we would know that. One, I think for us, feedback from teachers in the field, hearing from them that this is a useful tool that they are using regularly, and that it is informing their planning and their instructional practices, so that they are working with students in a way that they typically may have not been able to do had they not had this tool. So I think one, if we can hear that from teachers, the success stories coming from the classroom, that is absolutely one way that we will know that. And I will say too, another thing for us is it is truly just being able to have access to resources. And so by pulling all of this together, if by December 1st, we can get more clear about what are those resources that are actually helping to move students forward, I think that the tool actually can help us to even better identify those pieces that are working. Because as we begin to see students and progressing and get to see, well, what are the resources and what are the tools that teachers are relying on most heavily, and then really looking at that data and going from there, I think that'll be another success piece for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think early on, our goal, and I appreciate what Stephanie said too around this, like of having those early sets of teachers, say this is helpful. Our big goal from anytime you're providing a new tool, it's new, and so I think rather than some kind of like big marketing campaign, everybody we want to start small, start with those who are eager and early adopters, and really learn a ton from what they find useful. And so that's really the early goal. So if I can come back and say, gosh, we had this handful of educators really dig in and use this as part of their back to school effort, and here's what we learned, that's going to be a huge win. And then I think the other thing is, are we laying the foundation for that new future, Hetty, that you were just talking about? The new future where we want to regularly understand how kids are doing academically and from a well-being perspective and from an attendance perspective. Is this infrastructure, is the way information is being presented, the materials and resources, is this working? And does it provide us this infrastructure to then build on as we expand the use of this to more educators and fill in additional information in that place?
And I'll throw in the easy answer, like from the data analytics side as well. The more people are still using it in December and logging in, and then that'll be an indicator. But I'd rather have more than that, is also getting feedback and saying, this is great, but what would be even better if you did this and this, and there are things we can do to make it better, because that's how it'll really take off. We're not going to get it right on day one. We want to make sure they stay with it, and then we want to figure out how to make it more useful over time.
There is also another question that came up in the chat after I tried asking this question. So I'm going to go back to it for a second before we turn over. There's a question about, how do you think about student data? Do students and families own the data? And how are families involved in deciding how their child's data will be used?
there's sort of a technocratic answer to that question, which may or may not be satisfactory. But this is really an issue of local control, and we respect that deeply. And so each locality sets its own policies around student data, including how and when it can be shared and with whom. And so what we do is we enable that essentially. So what I mean by that is every school district, at least in California, and I think this is true nationally, has its own policies about this, set by their locally elected school board. And it includes things like, can information about my child be on an external platform, and under what circumstances? And so in our case, we have data use agreements with each of these school districts that says it's okay. We think that's a phenomenally important piece of this. And I think we are, in this effort with Core and EA and South Carolina too, as our partners across the country, it's awesome. We're really endeavoring to go deeper than we have by getting this to teachers. We have a separate project that's been working on how to get information in front of kids and families about how they're doing. And it was a little bit on pause, but I'm deeply looking forward to picking that back up again as we get into the 21-22 school year, and thinking about how what we're learning from Rally can fit into what shows up on these roadmap reports that we've developed.
Stephanie or Jeff, do you want to add anything to who owns the student data?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, I second a lot of what Noah said. Obviously, very, very similar story here in South Carolina. But as we've been building out this tool, and as we talk about going back to kind of that training piece, and I actually see somebody putting it in the chat as well, a lot of focus on FERPA and how are we making sure that our local districts are adhering to their policies, and that we have all of these checks in place to ensure that student data is being used in a responsible and ethical way, and that we are following all of those guidelines and policies. And so again, for us as a state, we're bringing this tool to our districts, but I do think it's really interesting to note again, for us as a state of South Carolina, this is really us bringing education analytics and the Rally tool to our districts as a service from the state to sort of connecting them. But this data is not coming to the state. So this is not flowing up to us to do anything with. This is truly, the data is remaining with the districts and at the local level. So I think that is an important distinction to make for us as a state who's involved. It's important for us to make sure that we had equitable access for every single district in the state. Again, if you're a teeny tiny district of 800 students, you may not have been able to engage with education analytics and think about building this type of a tool. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody has access to the tool, but that the tool was theirs.
Yeah, and certainly, so Education Analytics, it's a nonprofit in Madison, Wisconsin. We do not own the data by any means. So I'm an economist. I got there last year, and first week, I got my FERPA training. I'm big on data privacy. This is not. And we're serving.
This is why you have mock screens and not real screens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I take it very seriously, and we're serving the state of South Carolina, processing this, but it's the district's data. Same thing, the data sharing agreements, and they're a hassle to work through, but everyone has to be satisfied, and rightly so.
And Jeff, actually, I have one other question that got asked early on, and I'm going to bring it back to you. And part of it is because I think by so on one hand, individual student data has lots of privacy protections. On the other hand, when you have large aggregate data and you can analyze it, not knowing who the individual kids are, that is not actually something that we have to worry too much confidentially because we don't know who the kids are, but it allows us to answer research questions and does the kind of predictive analytics that the system is for. So my question one is, as we try to learn from your work, one, when you think about predictive analytics, what goes into that predictive analytics, and how do you think this experience of what you're now putting into your data system will inform the work around how we engage in predictive analytics and what we know about what we need to see as early warning signs for kids?
Yeah, I mean, so like the narrow definition of what goes into the models, is the biggest thing that goes into the model is, I think, as it was implied in the question, performance on past tests. But currently the models that we use also brings in some demographic information, some program participation, like students with disabilities, indicators of economic disadvantage. What we've done in each case is we've used models that we've used for growth measures for just predicting, assessing for predicting annual growth of student scores. So they're very narrowly defined. We're trying to do our best to predict where the students will be, but there are it's me personally, I think about there are questions about the face validity of these models, and my focus is always narrow and understandable and interpretable and things that make sense. So I don't know if that's a.
Do we think that now that you might have more data to scale, like student well-being, you'd have more? What I'm wondering is whether, because you're trying to create a system that might have more data at scale on things that are more than just past performance of tests, whether that then gives us a different way to predict things.
In the future, it would. I mean, I will say is that unless it's systematically administered, that would be hard to build into the models. But I think that's what I think that we can think about the distance learning, the indicators and the resources people have, and things that are going on around them. But yeah, we've have models with core with social emotional learning in them, and I think that's important to bring in. We don't have historical data yet to bring them in though. Absolutely, but it's a key thing for including.
And what I'm anticipating, oh, sorry, Hetty.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, sure. Yeah, I mean, what I'm anticipating is going to be really useful about these predictive models. I mean, it's one thing to sort of see the projection of where your students are going. I think where this is going to become particularly useful is as we get deeper into the school year, and educators are trying to understand, how am I doing with these students? Are my students doing about as well as they would in a typical year, worse, maybe even a little better in some cases? And then how can we learn from that? So that's where I think this is going to become particularly useful. It's a way to give a signal to educators about how students are doing. And I'll tell you one thing that's really interesting. Every time we do work with teachers on continuous improvement, they always want to look at individual kids. Like it is like you show a teacher their aggregate information, and the first thing they want to know is, where are my kids? It's phenomenally powerful to sit with a teacher and have them look at information, even like this, where they can see, all right, here's where students like yours would typically be going, and here's where this student's going, and to have them look at that across a number of students and be able to reflect on that. Sometimes you might think they might want more, but I think that's often enough to, again, the goal here is, when it comes to data, is like, how do I connect what's happening with students with what I'm doing and what I'm seeing with the student? If that connection can be made, like, that's what's golden, because that then gives you opportunity to say, okay, so what might I try next? What might I try differently? And that's the whole goal of the information, is to try to get to that like thoughtful side of what I might try next, what I might try differently.
Thank you. I also want to call attention, there was a poll that went up. And if folks can take a moment and fill that survey poll up, that would be fabulous. So with all of that, Yoli, I think I'm going to turn this out over to you. This has been what an amazing panel. So appreciate the dedication, the spirit of quick action, come up with a new tool, test it out, and move it out as quickly as possible in 2 places. That is just amazing. I really want to have a chance to hear from you guys again in December to see what you learned and where we landed. And I just so appreciate the fact that might also give us those chances to stop, reflect, and think about what we've really learned at this moment. Thank you so much. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jeff, both for being here, but for all the incredible work you're doing every day to make this happen.
And thank you, Hetty, for doing such a fabulous job moderating and really engaging and pushing on some very important questions. We hope that the panel found those questions helpful as you continue to deepen the work of Rally. I just want to say on behalf of the campaign how much we appreciate that you jumped in to such a critical need at a critical time. You had the courage to figure out how to respond so quickly, innovate and invent and iterate along the way, really listening to the voices of one of your most important stakeholders, which is the teachers. So just thank you for the work itself. You're helping us at the campaign learn as we deepen our efforts across the network of communities, how collectively we can all help slow, stop, and reverse learning loss. It's core to our work around ensuring early school success for more low-income children. So thank you for moving us forward. We're going to look forward to continuing to learn from you as the tool goes live to districts and as you continue to iterate and other tools that might be out there. So thank you all. With that, let me just acknowledge, again, this is the end of GLR week. So what a fabulous webinar to end our week with. We want to thank our underwriting sponsors, the Bainham Family Foundation, the Bezos Family Foundation, and the Heinz Endowments, as well as our GLR Week 2020 sponsors. So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS, very strong partners of the campaign. Of course, the Anna E. Casey Foundation and the Wincott Foundation. And as I mentioned earlier, if we go to the next slide, here you see all of our other enterprise investors. So thank you to all of them as well. I won't go through the list, but you'll see our gratitude for all of these investors. And then finally, again, this wraps up GLR Week 2020. We shared with you links so that if you wanted to go back to any of these webinars and learning opportunities that you might have missed, we welcome you viewing the recording. And coming up next week, we have our regular GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar on the 21st. We talked about that earlier. And then we round out the month on July 28th with the final webinar of the month on Relationships Mattered. And last but not least, for those of you that are funders, we invite you to be part of our funder to funder conversations. You see them here. They're also in the chat box with the link so that if you want to register for any of these conversations, we would love to have you. With that, thank you again. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy. Bye all.